A veteran stood up from the audience, walked toward Johnny Carson, and whispered, "I'm here because of you." Johnny Carson cried on live television for the first time in 30 years. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. November 1978. Studio 6B at NBC in Burbank, California. Another Tuesday night. Another monologue. Another 300 people in the studio audience expecting laughs and celebrity interviews and Ed McMahon's booming voice and Doc Severance's outrageous jackets. Johnny was 17 years into hosting the show. He mastered every aspect of it: the timing, the delivery, the way to make a bad joke land with just a raised eyebrow, the art of making guests feel comfortable while keeping the audience entertained. He was in the middle of his opening monologue. Something about Congress and the economy. The audience was laughing in all the right places. Ed was chuckling beside the desk. The cameras were rolling smoothly. It was television perfection. And then Johnny saw the man in the third row stand up. The audience noticed too. Laughter began to falter. People turned to look. It wasn't normal for someone to stand during the monologue. Security began moving toward the aisle. But Johnny raised his hand. The universal gesture for wait. The man was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. Silver hair neatly combed. Simple button-down shirt and slacks. The kind of working-class dignity that came from a lifetime of honest labor. He stood with a slight stoop, as if his body carried weight his posture couldn't quite support anymore. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at Johnny with an expression that was impossible to read from the stage. Not angry. Not excited. Something else. Something that made Johnny set down his cue cards. "Sir?" Johnny said, his monologue voice gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. "Are you all right?" The man nodded slowly. Then he began walking down the aisle toward the stage. That night on The Tonight Show, a veteran approached Johnny Carson, whispered, "I'm here because of you." And Carson cried on live television for the first time in his 30-year career. The control room erupted. "What's happening? Who is this guy? Do we cut to commercial?" Director Bobby Quinn held up his hand. "Keep rolling. Johnny's handling it." Security guards flanked the man as he walked, but they didn't stop him. Something about the way Johnny was watching him, the way Johnny had set down his cards and was now standing up from behind his desk, told them to wait. The man reached the edge of the stage. The cameras had pulled back to show the full scene: Johnny standing behind his desk, Ed McMahon rising from his chair beside it, Doc Severinsen lowering his trumpet, the entire studio holding its breath. "Can you help him up?" Johnny asked one of the stagehands, gesturing to the man. 2 crew members helped the man climb the 3 steps onto the stage. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone whose body hurt in ways that had become permanent. Johnny walked around his desk to meet him. They stood face to face under the lights, the famous host and the unknown man, while 300 people and millions watching at home tried to understand what they were witnessing. "What's your name, sir?" Johnny asked gently. "Thomas," the man said, his voice quiet but steady. "Thomas Brennan. I'm sorry for interrupting your show, Mr. Carson. I know this isn't. I shouldn't have." "It's okay," Johnny said. "You're here now. Tell me why." Thomas looked at Johnny for a long moment. His eyes were wet. When he spoke, his voice broke. "I needed to say thank you. Before it was too late." Carson stopped mid-monologue. The entire studio froze. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1972. Johnny Carson received thousands of letters every week. Fan mail, requests for appearances, people pitching ideas, children asking for autographs. The Tonight Show had an entire department that handled correspondence. Most letters were answered with form responses and signed photos. But in March 1972, a letter arrived that Johnny's assistant, a young woman named Patricia, pulled from the pile and brought directly to his desk. She'd been screening his mail for 3 years and had never done this before. "You need to read this one," Patricia said quietly, handing it to him. The letter was written in careful, deliberate handwriting on lined notebook paper. It was from a soldier named Thomas Brennan, writing from a VA hospital in San Diego. He explained that he'd been a Marine in Vietnam, that he'd been badly wounded in the Tet Offensive in 1968, and that he'd spent the last 4 years in and out of hospitals dealing with injuries and what the doctors were calling post-traumatic stress disorder. He wrote about the nightmares, the flashbacks, the way loud noises made him dive for cover, the guilt over surviving when so many of his brothers hadn't, the struggle to find meaning in continuing to live when part of him had died in that jungle. And then he wrote about the Tonight Show. Every night at 11:30 p.m., when the nightmares made sleep impossible and the darkness felt suffocating, Thomas would turn on his small television in his hospital room and watch Johnny Carson. For 90 minutes, Johnny's jokes and celebrity interviews and stupid sketches would pull Thomas out of the jungle and back into something resembling normal life. "You probably don't remember this," Thomas wrote, "but 3 months ago, you did a bit where you pretended to be a bad golfer. It was silly and simple, and you probably forgot about it 5 minutes after taping. But I laughed. Really laughed. For the first time in 4 years. And in that moment, I remembered that life could still contain laughter. That there was still a world beyond the war." Thomas explained that he'd been contemplating suicide. He'd written letters to his family. He'd made peace with dying. But that stupid golf bit had made him laugh, and the laughter had been such a shock to his system that it broke through the numbness. He'd decided to wait one more day. Then another. Then another. "I'm writing to tell you that I'm still here," Thomas concluded. "I don't know if I'll ever be okay. But I'm still here. And it's because of you. You saved my life and you didn't even know it. Thank you." Johnny read the letter 3 times. Then he called Patricia back into his office. "Find him," Johnny said. "Get me his phone number. I want to talk to him." Patricia made calls. It took 2 days, but she tracked Thomas down at the VA hospital. Johnny called him personally. They talked for 40 minutes, about Vietnam, about recovery, about the strange power of laughter to cut through darkness. "Keep watching," Johnny told him. "And if you ever need to talk, you call this office. Anytime. Day or night. Someone will get me." Thomas did call. Not often, but a few times over the next few years. Usually late at night when the nightmares were particularly bad. Johnny always took the calls. Sometimes they'd talk for an hour. Sometimes just 5 minutes. Just enough to remind Thomas that someone was listening. Over time, the calls became less frequent. Thomas got better, not cured, never cured, but better. He got an apartment. He found work at a hardware store. He started attending a support group for veterans. He built something resembling a life. And every night at 11:30, he watched The Tonight Show. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny never mentioned Thomas to anyone except Patricia. He didn't talk about it on air. He didn't use it for publicity. It was private, a connection between 2 people that existed outside the television machine. Until tonight. November 1978. When Thomas Brennan stood up in the audience and walked toward the stage, Johnny and Thomas stood facing each other under the stage lights. The audience was completely silent. Ed McMahon had tears streaming down his face, not even trying to hide them. Doc Severinsen stood motionless with his trumpet held against his chest. "Mr. Carson," Thomas said, his voice stronger now. "6 years ago, I wrote you a letter. You called me. You talked to me when I needed someone to talk to. You saved my life." Johnny's jaw tightened. He remembered. Of course he remembered. "I've been trying to get tickets to your show for years," Thomas continued. "I wanted to tell you in person. To thank you face to face. Tonight I finally got tickets. And I'm sitting out there watching you do your monologue and I realize I can't wait. I can't let another night pass without telling you." Thomas reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Old, worn at the creases, yellowed with age. He carefully unfolded it. It was Johnny's phone number. The one Patricia had given him in 1972. Written in pencil on VA hospital stationery. "I've carried this with me every day for 6 years," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "When things got dark, I'd take it out and remember that someone cared enough to give me this. That I mattered to someone, even if it was just as a voice on the other end of a phone line." Johnny's eyes filled with tears. In 30 years of broadcasting, through interviews with presidents and movie stars, through comedy bits and dramatic moments, through thousands of hours of live television, Johnny Carson had never cried on camera. Not once. Until now. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Johnny reached forward and took Thomas's hand. Not a handshake. Just holding his hand, the way you'd hold the hand of a family member in a hospital room. "Thomas," Johnny said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to understand something. That phone call, talking to you, that mattered to me too. You think you're thanking me, but I'm the one who should be thanking you." "For what?" "For reminding me why any of this matters." Johnny gestured to the set, the cameras, the whole machinery of television. "I tell jokes and interview celebrities and make people laugh. But that's not why I do this. I do this because sometimes, not often, but sometimes, it reaches someone who needs it. Someone like you." Johnny turned to face camera one directly, breaking the fourth wall, speaking past the studio audience to the millions watching at home. "Folks, I want to tell you something. For 30 years, I've made a living making people laugh. But every once in a while, I get reminded that laughter is more than entertainment. It's medicine. It's connection. It's proof that we're still human even when everything feels broken." He turned back to Thomas. "Thank you for surviving. Thank you for being here. Thank you for reminding me that this," he gestured between them, "this connection is what it's all about." But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, ever saw coming. Johnny did something he'd never done in 3 decades of hosting. He walked Thomas over to Ed McMahon's chair, the second chair, the co-host spot, and gestured for him to sit down. "Stay," Johnny said simply. "Sit with us for the rest of the show." The audience erupted. Not polite applause. Thunderous, standing applause that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Thomas sat in Ed's chair, overwhelmed, while Ed moved to a chair brought out by stagehands. Doc Severinsen started playing softly, something gentle and respectful. Johnny sat back behind his desk. He picked up his cue cards, looked at his planned jokes, and set them back down. "You know what?" Johnny said to the audience. "I don't think we're going to do the rest of the monologue. Thomas, tell us about yourself. What do you do now? How's life?" And for the next segment, 12 minutes that should have been filled with comedy sketches and commercial transitions, Johnny Carson just talked with Thomas Brennan. About his hardware store job. About his small apartment in San Diego. About the veteran support group that had helped him rebuild his life. About the simple joys he'd rediscovered. Coffee in the morning, walks on the beach, calling his sister every Sunday. It wasn't entertainment in the traditional sense. It was just 2 people talking while America watched. Raw. Real. Human. The producers in the control room didn't know what to do. This wasn't the show they'd planned. Sponsors had paid for comedy and celebrities, not an impromptu interview with an unknown veteran. But the ratings for that segment would end up being some of the highest in Tonight Show history. When the show went to commercial, Johnny stood and shook Thomas's hand one more time. "Come back anytime," he said. "Seriously. You want tickets, you call Patricia. You're always welcome here." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. After the show, Johnny called Patricia into his dressing room. He still had the piece of paper Thomas had shown him, the old VA stationery with Johnny's phone number written in pencil. "Frame this," Johnny said, handing it to her. "Put it in my office where I can see it every day." Patricia took the paper carefully. Johnny, what you did tonight was the least I could do, Johnny interrupted. He carried my number for 6 years. The least I can do is carry his reminder. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The framed paper hung in Johnny Carson's office for the rest of his time hosting The Tonight Show. When he retired in 1992, he took it with him. It hung in his home until he died in 2005. Thomas Brennan lived another 32 years. He never missed an episode of The Tonight Show. He got married in 1982 to a woman he met at his support group. They had 2 children. He worked at that hardware store until he retired in 1995. He died peacefully in 2010, surrounded by family. In his obituary, his family mentioned that he'd once appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. That it had been one of the proudest moments of his life. That Johnny had treated him not like a veteran or a victim, but like a friend. The clip of that night, Johnny crying, Thomas sharing his story, the 2 of them just talking honestly on live television, has been viewed millions of times. It's studied in broadcasting classes as an example of when television stops being entertainment and becomes something more important. And in every late-night host's office today, whether they know the story or not, they're carrying on Johnny's legacy. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is stop the jokes, listen to another human being, and remind them that they matter. Thomas Brennan mattered. Johnny Carson made sure he knew it. And 30 years later, we're still talking about the night television remembered it was supposed to serve people, not ratings.